Okay then. Hi. Firstly, if some of you have come here to hear more about blue pill or invisible things, I have to make you disappointed. I'm the other Joanna Rutkowska, security specialist. My speciality is, however, of the legal persuasion. I work as a legal advisor, as they said, at the Swedish Post and Telecom 4G. And my speciality is protective security, or säkerhetsskydd as it's known in Swedish. Since I will be speaking about a very uniquely Swedish legislation, and of course English is not my first language, I hope that you can bear with my ums and hums during this presentation. I do have a point to make in between them, and I hope that you will enjoy my talk. So this is basically me. When I tell people that I work with classified information concerning national security, they generally get one of these images in their head. And it's quite fun to joke about conspiracy theories or tinfoil hats, and even about stuffy bureaucrats with barely one foot in reality. And the SO there, that's my significant other, not my security officer, although I think my security officer actually has the same mental picture. But the thing is that these pictures, or the images that people get, are important. People's perceptions of protective security and of people that work with it, they are highly influential on how protective security is integrated and received in the daily operations of a business. I have a too small head mic. How about this? Maybe? Yeah, I wasn't nervous before, so this is totally okay. Where were I? Yeah, on the truth. Well, the fact of the matter is that the truth is somewhere in between all these images, and it contains a lot more coffee than is seen here. Working with classified secret information is neither strange nor remarkable in any way, but it is tremendously important. So, why me, and why am I here? Well, the Swedish Post and Telecom 4G has, among other things, duties regarding protective security within the electronic communications sector. We provide regulations and guidelines, as well as monitoring the operations within this sector for companies and associations within the sector. We are also responsible for decisions regarding security clearance and for personnel working in certain projects or in certain positions in these companies. And it's a quite common misconception, actually, that only companies with ties to the military or with customers that have critical functions like governmental bodies or hospitals, something like that, that need to concern themselves with security or protective security. This is, however, not at all the case, as we shall see. Protective security is, comes from this legislation. It's called säkerhetsskyddslagen in Swedish, säkerhetsskyddslagen and säkerhetsskyddsförordningen, or the Protective Security Act and the Protective Security Regulation. And it can be summarized as the means to prevent espionage, sabotage, terrorism, and other crimes against national security. It's mostly about protecting data, but there are also some other things in there that we will be talking about. And the nature of the threat towards Sweden is different today than just a few years ago. It has, among other things, resulted in the resumption of the total defense planning, including the reactivation of the civil defense. The total defense planning, which includes both military and civil defense planning, requires by necessity that sensitive information is exchanged both between authorities, but also to, from, and within the private sector. And this cooperation requires security information management on a different level than one would maybe normally employ on a daily basis. Security protection in this context is basically a preventative measure that reduces the distance between threat and defense. It is dependent on and exists in interaction with the total defense planning. So you could see the total defense planning as preparations for certain operations for crisis and war, while protective security are security requirements for protecting the planning itself and intended operations from adverse antagonistic attacks. The Protective Security Act applies to all legal entities, whether they are governmental bodies, state-owned or private companies, or other associations, if the entity's activities are of importance to national security, or if they need to be protected against terrorism. This means that telecom operators, for example, with assets for communication at the network or transport levels, need to analyze their operations in order to see if these are considered of importance to national security. And if they are, protective security should ideally be treated as an integrated but distinct part of the total operations. And it lies somewhere at the top of the security pyramid, which you can see here. It has its own legislations and it has its own challenges. It can, however, be integrated into the process which the company manages all its information technology. And this is important because leaving out protective security from these processes can be as detrimental as not distinguishing it at all. So what is to be prevented by protective security? Firstly, you can say that there are kind of three legs that protective security stands on. Then there's prevention of terrorism, which is kind of the black hole where we put everything that doesn't fit anywhere else. But firstly, it should prevent that classified data relating to national security is divulged, altered, or destroyed. It should prevent unauthorized individuals from gaining access to places where they can access both data, such data where activities concerning national security are conducted. And it should also prevent that non-trustworthy individuals participate in activities that are important to national security. And to figure out if you have the information such information that is classified, or such operations that need to be protected by access restriction or by security screening, you need to do a security analysis in accordance with the fifth paragraph in the protective security regulations. The security analysis should answer three questions. In theory, this is very simple. In practicality, it's one of the hardest things you do under this act. And the security analysis is partly a process aimed at mapping what is to be protected within the operations, and partly a document that substantiates the reasons behind the mapping and the choices done. It should include both identification and prioritization of important assets within the organization, the vulnerabilities, the risk, and the management of these risks. In the long run, the safety analysis or the security analysis aims at establishing backing for decisions made. The security measures can potentially be relatively costly and risk affecting the efficiency of an operation, which I'm sure that you can all agree with. It is therefore important that those who decide on security measures understand the motives for the actions required on the basis of these identified needs. Likewise, it's important that those who have to take protective security into account in their daily jobs understand the underlying causes. Otherwise, there's a risk that employees try to circumvent the safeguards in order to increase efficiency in the work. We should at this point note that we are still talking about protective security, for solely about adversary threats against assets important to national security, or such assets that should be protected against terrorism. We are, at least in this analysis, not concerned with random script kids or botched updates. These can all be identified, but should be kind of put aside and maybe later put into another type of all-hazard analysis. And I really want to stress that getting the identification of assets critical from the viewpoint of national security mixed with identification of assets critical for your operations or for your management, it's a bad idea. What's important to your management or to your shareholders may not be of national importance and vice versa. And for comparison, we can see what happened with the recent incident at the Swedish transport agency, Transportstyrelsen. So what is of national importance and what should be protected under this act? Well, firstly, one has to consider what impact an asset or the absence of an asset has on key functions in society. Could a great number of people's lives and health be affected? Could a large geographical area be affected? Is this impact prolonged or does it occur in an inappropriate time? Could the event have serious social, economical, or political consequences for society or other social functions affected? And is there a risk of negative consequences in the future? All this will, of course, depend on an asset's external and internal features, how many assets there are, if there's a lack of capability, what vulnerabilities there are, how the protection of an asset is constructed, or what dependencies other assets have on it. Often the decisions is made based on a combination of all these factors. And here I've listed just some very crude examples of critical assets and an assessment of the assets that you normally do in an analysis like this. And these should only be seen as examples. I did this in like 10 minutes, so don't put too much into that. And it should also be remembered that assets that are to be protected can, for example, be the systems themselves, but also the services they provide, or information about them, or information stored on them. It's quite easy to forget this and just think that protective security concerns the actual legal documents from an authority that are stamped with this kind of big security red stamp. But this is not the case for the Act to be applicable. So what now? Let's say you've identified assets that by law should be protected by strict security measures. Maybe servers required to be equipped with crypto systems provided from the Swedish armed forces and physically separated from the internet, or the location of one of your most crucial infrastructure should be kept secret, when at the same time these assets consist of an integrated part of a largely public, sometimes international structure. Well, what do? Maybe not that. Unfortunately, there are no quick fixes. And I would love to leave you with like 10 tips on how to implement protective security measures in your operation. But the truth of the matter is that this legislation is quite tough to implement in the private sector. There is a new law on its way, and while it will make some things clearer, it will itself undoubtedly present some challenges for us. What I can say, though, is that our joint efforts with protective security must be based on a common understanding of the challenges, both legal, technical, and antagonistic, that affect this sector. Starting from the security analysis, we need to be able to have an open dialogue about what is desirable and what is possible in order to obtain a balanced security. And please don't get me wrong here. A balanced security does not mean that you get to choose which legislation applies to you. Again, those of you that followed the recent to's and fro's in the incident with the Swedish Transport Agency know that decisions like that can have very dire consequences, both for the organization itself and on a political level. But I do think that we still need to be honest about the limitations that our infrastructure possesses, including the limitations inherent in the systems that today process, store, and exchange our data. And from there, we need to decide what to keep and what to redo, so that we can keep up with the threats ahead, because we know that the political context and in which we operate right now, and the security context in which we operate, it's not going to change for the better in the recent future, at least. So we really need to be doing this. Of course, PTS has some activities prioritized during the coming years. Most of them are about the sectors, what the sector has to do in this area. First of all, the electronic communications sector's part in the nationwide effort to strengthen protective security is extremely important for us, and we will be working more with that. We have some technical analysis on its way. Of course, then deepen dialogue with the sector itself as a basis for both the civil and the military defense planning. We have some new regulatory work on its way, some supervisory and monitoring activities based on the civil and military defense planning and the new coming Protective Security Act. We also hope to deepen our cooperation with the public and private sector, because there's a lot of things here that we need to understand about our about the challenges ahead in both our sectors. And we have some broadened educational activities on its way too. And the electronic communication field is second to the supply of electronics, the highest prioritized by the Swedish armed forces in case of crisis and war. At the same time, the requirements based on the protective security legislation can be expensive, complex, and administratively demanding. The deteriorating security situation, with heightened international tensions and terrorist attacks both internationally and nationally, mean that the sector's ability to handle and exchange secret and sensitive information needs to increase. additional requirements may arise, as I said, in the future, with, especially with the implementation of the new Protective Security Act. And the electronic communication sector, as well as our own role as the monitoring authority, are key gears in the national security and the military defense machine. We all have a game, or we all have a place to be here. So that was my extreme talk. I'm very sorry for my crappy English, but I think that my point is really that we need to see this legislation as it applies to us all if we have this kind of operations, and not kind of put it in the lap of someone else to tell us that this or that should be done. So if you have any questions for me, I will try to answer them. Otherwise, I will be here during the lunchtime, and I would love to answer all your questions in Swedish.
So we have a question straight away, Joanna.
Hello. My name is Jörgen Städje, techie writer.
Hello.
You very quickly jumped over the most important point, expanding educational activities. Without that, all your other points are quite meaningless. Without education, no one is able to understand all the talk you have had here today. So, could you expand on your expanded education? That's, I mean, you know what's happening to Swedish schools. They're going downhill. Who's going to tell people what the problems are?
Yeah, okay, so you have a very good point there, and I'm with you on it, because the educational activities are the basis for the coming planning and the coming security measures that need to be taken. As a monitoring authority, we have some things planned here. We have educational activities for the electronic communications sector, where we basically... God, this is so hard in English, excuse me. Where we want to start with the management level and kind of go downwards from there. Because we think that if you don't have support from your management, you will have very hard to implement this further on. But I think that you also meant in kind of schools with people just generally.
No,
is that
correct?
Mm?
Start by management.
Yep.
Because if they don't care, anyone else gets the money to care.
Yes, and it's something that we see quite often, that the people working with this know what needs to be done, but they have very hard time getting the resources necessary to make it happen.
Any more questions for Joanna? PTS at the back.
Okay.
Hejsan, jag heter Mikael och jag undrar så här enkelt. Vad gör vi åt politiker som inte följer, myndigheter som inte följer era regleringar idag? Jag menar, du nämnde Transportstyrelsen. Yeah. Det är bara toppen på ett isberg utav de övergrepp som har skett mot säkerhet i Sverige.
Sorry, could you maybe answer that in English?
Yeah. I have no idea, but I think that to put it mildly, education is a good thing, and what happened at Transportstyrelsen is an educational moment for us all. I think it's, although it was it's very bad that it happened, it shines light at a legislation that maybe hasn't been really looked at for quite a while now. And it had some political implementation too, or political consequences. But I have really no good answer to your question, except that we need to educate people from the political level and downwards.
Sorry for not taking it in English. Will PTS have some kind of enforcement of governments or political or units that don't follow the regulations, or will it just be like, no, don't do that again, it was not good?
Right now we're kind of stuck. We can't enforce this act, but we will be able to when the new act arrives, hopefully next year. But that's still just within our sector, not on a political level. We have other authorities that do that, but not us, unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yeah, we've got one over on the right-hand side.
By looking at a government regulatory structure for protective security, are you implicitly assuming that protective security has failed in the market and the players themselves don't naturally do their tasks to the level that the public, as expressed in your agency, would expect them to do? And given that, do you really feel that regulatory imposition will fix this problem?
How much time do I have?
Sorry.
I think that this legislation has been quite tough to follow, not only for the market, but also for authorities. And I think it's been kind of handled as the young sibling that no one really cares about until, well, shit hit the fan, basically. And I'm a lawyer, so of course I think that more legislation will fix everything. It will at least give me more things to do. But no, I think that the coming legislation is better because the one we have, it has so many holes that we really can't do anything, even if we find problems that need to be fixed. To iterate, I think we need to work very hard with spreading information, spreading knowledge about this legislation at all levels in order to kind of fix the problems that we have right now.
Do you have any ideas on why market players and private enterprise don't see the value implicitly? Why aren't they solving this for you? Why do you need an external imposition? In other words, where are we going wrong from the other side of the fence?
Because this type of security doesn't sell. To a certain point it may very well do, but these are requirements that often go so much higher that what people are want to pay for. And that's why I think we need a regulation about this. But at the same time, I think that security should sell. It should sell better than it does. And that's something that we as authorities have to take back into our own organizations and learn to buy the right products or buy the right products so that security starts to sell from our point of view too.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any more questions for Joanna? At the back.
Damn it, I thought that we're just before lunch. No one would want to talk about this.
No problem with your English, by the way. Johan Lange at the Luck Concept. What about net neutrality? My mobile operator is continuously doing marketing on this, and they don't seem to listen to you at all. Or?
Net neutrality is one of those things that I kind of back away from. So I'm very sorry, but I can't answer your question, although it's a good question. So if you find the answer, please contact me.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have. Can you please?
Thank God.
Thank you.